After a series of unfortunate events, Charlie Frost's dad, conveniently named Jack Frost, turns into a giant, talking snowman with lots of love to give. And that's why today in Flick's summary, Jack Frost. This unusual Christmas flick opens with a blues band playing to a large wild crowd that appears to love them. One of the audience members picks up his phone and calls a colleague, confidently telling the other person in the line that they had to sign those guys as they were going to be huge. Weird opening for a Christmas movie, right? Well, the man in the band is none other than Jack Frost. Not the legendary one though, it just happens to be his name. We then cut back to Charlie, Jack Frost's son, who is at school during a snow day as kids around him engage in a snowball fight. His archy rival Rory, as he put it, tries to beat him during the fight, but Charlie knows better.
Can you say brain freeze?
Brain freeze.
You go, Charlie! The kids cheer him on as he blissfully returns home.
I'm the best.
Back home, he is greeted by his mother, Gabby, and he anxiously asks about his dad's whereabouts. Apparently, Jack was on tour with his band over at Denver and is scheduled to come home that same day. He does his best to stay awake until he arrives, but exhaustion has him beat, getting him knocked out before Jack returns. However, as soon as he gets back, his dad doesn't even waste a second and wakes up his dear boy Charlie, who pretends he wasn't asleep at all.
Yeah, man.
Oh, I was just resting my eyes.
You were? Wow.
The family then goes out on a snow-filled yard and start messing around, making a huge and interesting-looking snowman, who is the carbon copy of Jack himself.
He kind of looks like you.
He does?
Only a little cuter.
They are absolutely identical, like two peas in a pod. Later that night, Jack and Charlie have a little father-son talk, teasing each other and playing around as Charlie asks if his dad has brought him something from Denver. Jack pulls out a harmonica from his pocket and gives it to Charlie, telling him that he purchased that specific harmonica the same day that his kid was born. He then tells him that it has special powers and whenever he plays it, Jack will be able to hear it, clear as day, no matter how far they may be from one another.
You looking for the power?
Just testing it.
The next day, Charlie and Jack are practicing a little hockey and discussing power moves that star players performed that got them a taste of victory. Charlie asks him if he could come to his hockey match later that day, but Jack refuses, telling him that he has to go to the studio with his band. However, after some convincing and organization, Jack agrees to attend. Charlie celebrates and begs his dad to show him the power move, called the J-Shot, that the hockey stars performed. But just as he gets ready to show him, Jack's bandmates arrive and pick him up, so they go to the studio. Before they part ways, Charlie tries to make sure Jack's promise is golden and tell him to not forget about the match later on. Flash forward to Charlie's hockey game and Jack is nowhere to be found. Or, well, he is, but he's still at the studio with his band. Charlie desperately looks around the crowd for his father, but nothing. Zilch, completely distracting him from the game as they miserably lose to the opposing team. By the time Jack finishes recording, it's already nighttime.
You lied to me.
He nervously returns home to a visibly angry wife who scolds him for making another empty promise yet again. Seeing that he very clearly has upset his son, he goes to Charlie's room and genuinely apologizes, explaining that sometimes being a musician entails being a selfish jerk. Jack tells him to keep his dreams alive and tells Charlie that they will go on a real Christmas vacation to Aspen the next day as there's nothing to keep him away. Without skipping a beat, Charlie excitedly accepts his apology. The following morning, the family is rushing to get everything ready for their Christmas trip, throwing bags every which way as Charlie brings everything he can think of. Just before they leave, Jack gets a phone call and has Gabby and Charlie anxiously waiting for him. Once done, Jack tells them that he is an inch away to getting signed, but he needs to play for a record producer. I'm guessing you can see where this is going. He tells the family he can no longer make it to Aspen, and that his bandmates are on their way to pick him up. Fed up with his empty promises, Charlie gives him the harmonica he gave him just a few days earlier.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
On his way to the show, he regrets having left his family for a show during Christmas and sending them away to celebrate the holiday without him. One of his mates, Mac, notices the absolute despair he is under and tells him to go back home. He then lets the other band members know about his decision, who cheer him on and decide to return as well, not wanting to risk a good Christmas for a record deal. He borrows a car from one of his friends and sets himself on the road to go back to his family. On his way there, the snow constantly gets in the way of his eyesight until at one point he swerves and crashes the car and sadly dies. See? I told you there was some unfortunate events right here. Flash forward a year later and Charlie is still devastated over the loss of his father. He returns home to his mom as they cry and embrace themselves, hoping to move on as soon as possible. At night, Charlie finds a box that carried the same harmonica Jack gave him a year ago. He returns to his room and starts playing with the instrument. And remember how Jack said it had special powers? Well, he has come back from the dead in the shape of a snowman and is rather eager to see his son again. He asks Charlie to open the door for him, but his son screams upon the sight of the talking and walking snowman.
Did you get the door?
Of course, Jack is unaware of his shocking makeover and is also surprised when he looks at his reflection. Charlie is completely terrified over the walking, talking snowman and tries to block all possible entries to his house. Gabby returns home from Christmas shopping and notices the snowman standing outside of the house, as Jack does his best to remain completely still as she enters her home. Charlie then tells his mother that the snowman outside is alive, that can talk and walk, and heck, it even knows his name. But let's just say she isn't too quick to believe him.
Mom, I swear to you, he came to life, waddled into the street, and a big snowplow took him away.
From outside the window, Jack sees how the family tries to get through the day as he emotionally lets out a tear and wonder why he had to turn into a snowman. The following morning, convinced he saw the snowman move, Charlie grabs a hairdryer and shoves it in his face, ordering him to talk or he will turn to puddle. The snowman remains still. That is, of course, until Charlie actually turns the hairdryer on and Jack immediately reacts. He tries to calm Charlie down and says he can explain everything, except the part of being a snowman. As anyone would, Charlie runs away and heads back to school. Jack catches up to him and notices Rory, the archie enemy and school bully, picking on Charlie. Jack throws snowballs at Rory and his minions, and a snowball fight quickly ensues.
Snowball fight? You pick the one area where you don't want to mess with me. Snowman? No, much, much more. I am the Wizard of Blizzard!
If it isn't obvious, Jack won the match. Having upset the bullies, Charlie runs away with Jack leading the way as the mean boys chase after them. Surprisingly enough, after quite a long-winded and intense chase, Jack and Charlie manage to outrun them. If you couldn't tell by now, Charlie has now accepted Jack as the snowman version and welcomes him back into his life. They both realize they owe Jack's new presents due to him playing the harmonica the night he returned.
You were the one who played on the magic harmonica.
What? Magic harmonica? I thought you made that up!
So did I.
Charlie and Jack head on home, where they try to catch up on life for a bit. However, Gabby gets home and Jack absolutely refuses to have Gabby see him like this, so they do their very best to hide the huge snowman once again. Thankfully, she doesn't suspect a thing. Gabby decides to have a little talk with Charlie, who apparently has quit hockey and isn't on the best of terms with his friends, but he isn't having any of it, and shoos her away. Upon returning from school the next day, Charlie isn't so excited about his new snowman dad, especially after the snowball fight and chase from the day before, now that Rory wants to basically kill him. Jack apologizes for the rough day he had earlier but insists on still hanging out with him, but Charlie declines, telling him that it will be pretty obvious that a talking and walking snowman is out and about in the street. So that's when they come up with this little idea.
I can't believe I let you talk me into this.
I think we look kinda, cute.
Turns out it wasn't the greatest idea after all now that Gabby has spotted Charlie walking around while carrying a snowman. Jack and Charlie then engage in a little game of hockey as his dad shows his son the J-shot move he promised he'd show him. They return home and have a bit of a fight right outside the door, once again catching Gabby and Mac's eyes. In hopes to straighten Charlie out, Mac takes him out to discuss what's going on as the kid instantly notices what he's talking about. They have a bit of a heart-to-heart about how much both of them miss Jack and eventually go their separate ways. Sometime later, and with Christmas Eve only 10 hours away, the weather has grown a little hotter. In fact, as the weatherman put it, hot enough to melt a snowman. Geez, gotta read between the lines, huh? Later, Charlie makes amends with his friends and decides to return to hockey thanks to his father's encouragement. Oh, and he has a hockey match almost immediately after. All the while, Jack is slowly but surely melting away, but absolutely determined to, one way or another, be able to watch his son play hockey. He's able to make it to the game, but melted at a much higher rate that he probably wanted. Charlie performs the J-shot his dad showed and manages to shoot a score, making the team finally win. The kid notices that his dad is rapidly melting and hurries to look for a colder place to set him in. He decides to go to Gabby and tells her about how her husband turned into a snowman. Bad timing to tell her though, cause she doesn't believe a word of it. Charlie takes the snowman and Gabby chases after him and calls for Mac in hopes they can stop him. Unfortunately for him, Rory decides to challenge him right then and there while the snowman is melting, but Charlie tries to shut him down, but he only insists even more.
I don't know who's more stupider, you or your snowman.
Excuse me. Did you just say stupider? What kind of word is stupider?
Surprisingly enough, Rory doesn't run away from him and even empathizes with the kid as tries to help Charlie and Jack get to somewhere cold. As this is happening, Gabby and Mac call the police and report Charlie missing along with a snowman. What a strange report that must have been, huh? Charlie and Jack manage to get somewhere cold just in time and head to the cabin. They were scheduled to go right before he died. Jack calls Gabby and asks her to come over and see him for herself. Of course, she does as she is told right away. In a heartbreaking scene, Jack tells Charlie that he's going to have to go, as it won't be cold all year round. Charlie tries to dissuade him, but Jack knows what he has to do. Just as he is starting to disappear, Gabby shows up and right before he completely vanishes, he gives them one final look to his previous self, the original Jack Frost. Without as much as a goodbye, Jack finally goes away. During a rather short epilogue, Gabby and Charlie seem to be doing okay as the kid plays hockey along with his friends, which now includes Rory. Now excuse me while I go to cry. And that's all for today. Jack Frost in a nutshell. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this movie. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with your friends. Merry Christmas, and see you next time!